So you might have seen the Eurogamer review of Arc Raiders that's doing the rounds, where they gave the game 2 stars, and amongst a sea of other outlets and general user reviews being sky high. It's one of the most popular games in recent memory. It had over 700,000 unique players across the last few days. Its second week after the full reveal actually beat its first week, which apparently is unprecedented in gaming history. However, the reason that Eurogamer knocked the game down to 2 stars was specifically around the game's use and the studio, Embark Studios' use of AI in the game's design. Now that is beginning to spiral off into this massive conversation around the reality of how we implement AI in video game design. Now, it's worth saying right now, before I get to all the quotes that have been, that are mentioned, you've got Embark Studios weighing in as to the moralities around this stuff. I myself, and we'll get back around to my thoughts after I do some of the quotes and stuff, I am by far pro-human, which it seems insane that you have to say that in the modern day, but I just want to say that before we get into the rest of it. I would always rather that humans made the art that I consume, that humans made the expressions, and recorded the things that I'm going to take in and talk about and everything else. However, I do think there's an interesting wrinkle to the conversation that the likes of Hideo Kojima was getting at a good few weeks ago, where he was also asked about AI implementation in game development, and he referred to it as a friend and a tool and whatever, but we'll get there. In regards to Arc Raiders, we have the blurb over on the Steam page where, the game is flagged as being, as including AI, generative AI. The official Steam description says during the development process, we may use procedural and AI-based tools to assist with content creation. In all such cases, the final product reflects the creativity and expression of our own development team. It's also worth saying at this point, and it'll come back around every now and then, that Embark Studios made the finals, a game from 2023. Embark themselves are a bunch of ex-DICE people. They worked on Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefront 2. They left EA, they formed Embark, they made the finals, which was received pretty well in regards to its destructive tech. Like, you have all these different game modes, you're on first-person shooting and collecting objectives, marking different people and territories, things like that. However, that game also had AI voice work, apart from the game's announcer, which later on, because as we're going to get to, Embark's general thoughts on AI implementation is clearly lax, let's say, in regards to the general conversation around, the vast majority of AI implementation being pretty damn bad. You've probably seen the Coca-Cola advert for this, where even, Coca-Cola have done an AI version of the classic holidays are coming advert, and that wasn't received very well. Back in 2023, when they put the finals out, though, of the vast majority of that game's voice lines were AI. They were AI generated, apart from the game's announcer, which had a whole bunch of bespoke, different ways of welcoming you to the matches, mentioning the different maps that you were on. Even that dude was replaced with AI in Season 7 of the game. It's not necessarily talked about that much in regards to the initial controversy around AI implementation in that game at all, but even going forward, they did replace a human job with an AI. So it's worth throwing that in the pot. But like I said, you've got the Steam description around Arc Raiders saying that, they might use AI tools as they go, but in the end, it reflects the creativity of the humans behind the overall project. They have since been interviewed by PC Games N, where design director Virgil Watkins said the game in no way uses generative AI whatsoever. However, he then declined to provide any specifics. He said that, it's not within his purview. Watkins did acknowledge that the same vocal tech used in the finals was now used in Arc Raiders. He said, as they stated, it's the same tech as the finals. We use text-to-speech models. That is, we hire and contract voice actors for it. It's part of their contract that we use it as /AI for this purpose, and that allows us to do things like our ping system, where it's capable of saying every single item name, every single location name, and compass directions. That's how we can get that without needing to have someone come in every time we create a new item for the game. Polygon have done a follow-up with them as well, with a representative for Embark Studios, saying we use a combination of recorded voice audio and audio generated via text-to-speech tools in our games, depending on the context. Sometimes recording real scenes where actors get together, allowing character chemistry and conflict to shape the outcome, is something that adds depth to our game worlds that technology can't emulate. Other times, especially when it relates to contextual in-game action callouts, text-to-speech allows us to have tailored voiceover where we otherwise wouldn't, e.g. due to the speed of implementation. Making games without actors isn't an end goal for Embark, and text-to-speech technology has introduced new ways for us to work together. Now, again, like I said, they did replace a human voice actor with an AI in Season 7 of the finals, so it might not be their overall endgame, but they've literally done it before. And also, you know, it's worth addressing the Eurogamer review head-on, because this specific point that Eurogamer were making is that the thematics of Arc Raiders, that idea of humanity being sent underground by this, you know, machine overlord, like Terminator style, we're all just struggling to survive. The community around Arc Raiders is very vocal. You know, people will say, don't shoot me, I'm just trying to do this mission, let's work together instead. It is, as I said at the beginning, very pro-human. The idea behind Eurogamer's 2-star review was specifically saying that with so much AI implementation, and by replacing character voice lines with AI generated dialogue, you are specifically going against the very idea of the premise of the game. That is why they knocked it down. So, you know, it's just worth saying that, because I personally do agree with that. I think if you're going to make a whole game about, you know, the reality of being a bunch of humans fighting against this oppressive AI enemy force, then don't replace the humans with AI at a design level. That's kind of crazy. I actually like the idea in game design of, you know, if you're going to make an AI model, then have that be the thing that adapts to the human players in real time. Like, if, you know, if it's adapting to the way that we're playing, and it means that the impetus has to be put on the human players to coordinate and communicate and overcome the AI enemy, then that could be a really cool game mechanic to do. You know, part of Arc Raiders development involves machine learning around the ways that the enemies move, and they adapt to the terrain, and they adapt to the way that you're fighting them, the angles that you're taking them on, the amount of different raiders that are fighting them, whatever it is. But if we're talking about a positive AI implementation, or a way that it can be used in this exact context and this exact story setup, then I feel like what I just described would have been awesome. If you're going to insist on having AI implementation, I would rather it served the story rather than went against it. That is exactly what the Eurogamer review is saying. And in terms of a review from an individual who was doing the review and putting their opinion across, just, it's worth saying, like, I get what they're getting at, you know, and it has resulted in all of us talking about it as well. It is by far the most talked about Arc Raiders review, specifically because of that need to take a stand against AI voice work in games, or AI implementation in games, and like I said, job done in regards to raising awareness. Now, one thing that we obviously don't know, and to a degree would kind of clear it up, is that we don't know the voice actor contracts that worked on the game. Like, a lot of this is saying, like, look, it's not so bad, AI's not so bad, we paid the voice actors for their work, and then we use AI tools to take those voice recordings, modulate them, and make new lines of dialogue that the original recordings didn't have, but it's still accredited to that original voice actor. That's like this weird middle ground that I think, you know, it's worth just having this conversation right now as to the way the industry is going and the way the various creative fields are going. For me, I would want to know whether those voice actors are getting the residuals. If game development continues and they add DLC, they add new weapons or whatever it is, and they have an actual human voice actor who has done various different lines for the game, they then AI generate the call out saying, hey, the X72 shotgun is now over here, or whatever. Does that person get a residual payment? Is that the continuative way that you do right by the humans at the foundational level of making the stuff that you can then modulate and take forward? That's the crux for me personally. Because we don't know the specifics of the contract, so we likely never will, because everything will be, you know, under NDA, or will be under confidential agreements, or whatever it is. But it's that idea of, can you take something that a human did in the first place and then hyperextend it using AI for however long you want, cashing in as you go? That is largely at the core of the AI conversation. You know, that idea that all AI can do is fundamentally built on what came before, and allows someone at the top to cash in further down the line. Lastly, I wanted to throw in, as I mentioned earlier on, Hideo Kojima's comments, and we also have some from Glenn Schofield. There's an article over on GameSpot talking about AI implementation in video games, because, you know, it is one of the biggest topics in the industry, you know, that conversation around where is it okay to use AI, where is it not, what things qualify as AI. Like, you know, there's already that conversation around the likes of speed tree or procedural generation in games. You know, I feel like so much branding calls things AI when they're not. There's not necessarily an artificial intelligence there, some sort of mock-up consciousness. It's just a copy-paste algorithm or whatever it is. Not everything algorithmic is AI, is at least how I view it, but it's part of the conversation. Anyway, in the GameSpot article on AI, Hideo Kojima referred to AI as more of a friend. He viewed it as something that would boost efficiency overall. He says, I'd like AI to handle the tedious tasks that would lower cost and cut down on time. It's more like co-creating with AI instead of just using it. Kojima said, I see a future where I stay one step ahead, creating together with AI. Even that sentence gives a lot of people like myself, Josh Brown, the rest of the team, like, you know, a bit of the ick in terms of you're not, you know, creating alongside AI. Is there such a thing? There's creativity, depending on how you define that. You know, there's all the definitions around art and expression, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, I'm pro-human. I would rather have humans make my stuff. I think all of this just puts the impetus back on the human. There's a reason that you're listening to me say this to you right now and not an AI-generated version of a newsfeed, even though that will exist as well. I would always rather talk to people than humans. But that's just me. Also in the GameSpot write-up was Dead Space's Glenn Schofield, who also did the Callisto Protocol, saying, he said that AI isn't here to replace us, it's here to make us better, faster, and more efficient. He said it's a tool to be used in game development, which is largely the consensus that is being reached right now in terms of the more palatable views on AI implementation, where it can be used to speed up various different straightforward processes. It's very hard to nail those things down unless you start looking at the specifics of game generation, but it's one of those how much faith do you have in the games industry things per studio as well. The likes of EA, Ubisoft, they've already implemented AI co-pilots in regards to their game development processes. Like they have an AI co-pilot, Ubisoft have an AI co-pilot right next to their scriptwriters saying like, hey, do you want to do this? Like, hey, what about this for the next thing that you're going to do in terms of the way that a story can go or something like that. That's something that I personally would be against. Like I said, I want the creation to come from the writing team. I remember when God of War's David Jaffe, the original creator for God of War, was on the Sacred Symbols podcast talking to Colin Moriarty, and they were talking about AI, Moriarty being very against AI, and David Jaffe being very pro-AI. And Jaffe was saying that when he was contracted to do a job for a studio, he was doing some sort of consultancy work, he used AI to generate a handful of different prompts that he then took and ran with as part of the job. And it's just that thing of, why can't you do it yourself? Like, I'm not going to go at Jaffe himself necessarily. It's just that I never see why you need to do this. You're either in this field for creative reasons or you're not. At least that's how I would come down on it. And it's more about the ongoing conversation. Like I said, we're presenting a few different viewpoints on this, and Arc Raiders is very much the lightning rod that is sparking all of this all over again, just like it did back in 2023. And I think to bring it back to Arc Raiders, that game clearly plays incredibly well. It's clearly doing incredibly well. And it does bring about that conversation of what do you want from your games. What are you okay with in regards to presentation, in regards to voice lines, because they did stand out a hell of a lot in the finals. And once Embark swapped out that game's host in season 7 of the game for an AI announcer, it was massively obvious, and a lot of people stopped playing the finals, even though the game itself, the vast majority of it, is super solid, which is the exact situation that we have right now with Arc Raiders.